This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.
Hey, what is happening, you guys? Welcome back to Let's Go Win podcast. I'm excited because I get to have a reciprocal guest. I was a guest on his, and this guy is awesome. Ed Evarts is the founder and president of Excelluis Leadership Development. He is a leadership coach, team coach, strategist, podcast host, and author of Drive Your Career. Ed helps successful leaders build their self-awareness so they can self-manage more effectively. Brother, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great, JM. Thank you so much for welcoming me to your podcast.
Well, I had such a good time on yours. I figure, this guy's a great host. We may as well get him on as a guest. Let's try him in that area, and I know you'll crush it. So give me a little bit of, how did you get to doing all this cool stuff, writing books, podcast host? Is that just you knew straight away, this is what I'm going to do right out of college, or how did we get to this point?
Well, 12, 13 years ago, I was doing something very different. And if you had told me 13 years from then that I'd be an author and a podcast host, I would have laughed because it was not part of any specific journey that I had envisioned. But, I went to college, I graduated with a business degree. My parents were both in retailing. So I went into retailing and I spent about 15 years in the retailing industry. I transitioned up to New England and continued in my retailing career. During that career, I shifted from merchandising to human resources and spent probably half that time in the human resources arena, and then left retailing in 1998 to work for a records management company called Iron Mountain, which is based in Boston, big global company. And I worked there for about 10 years. I was laid off in 2008. And, if you're ever going to get laid off, JM, the right time is like June 1st, right when spring is happening and it's getting warmer and nicer. So, I did something I hadn't done at all in my career, which is I took some time off. So I took the summer to really figure out what I wanted to do next. And I decided that I did not want to go work for another company, that I wanted to do my own thing, that I wanted to take all the lessons and experiences that I had had and do it myself. And so I, what I would consider to do, slowly transition from a corporate employee to an independent consultant and started my own practice.
That's awesome, man. That's a big leap. Obviously, your hand was forced maybe a little bit, and I didn't realize Iron Mountain was out of Boston, so I learned something new today. But was there any trepidation? Because again, coming from the retail world, the being an employee, going to independent consultant, 1099, just tell me the thoughts that were going through your head, because that is a pretty big move.
Yeah, it was not purposeful. So I have had colleagues who planned to leave their company and during their last year or so at their company, build a website and start connecting with potential clients so that when they leave, they jump right into new and exciting opportunities and start generating revenue and, everything is great. I had not anticipated getting let go from Iron Mountain. My boss called me in to do my performance review, which was late at the time already. So I was already feeling a little anxiousness. And, she started the conversation with, Ed, I really haven't written your performance appraisal. I'm here to tell you today that your position has been eliminated. So that was at the time what I thought was the worst day of my career. I had not anticipated not being there. I had no plans. And, I quickly decided to think about what I wanted to do next. And so, I started from ground zero, Jam. I had no business model. I had no training in coaching per se, or business consulting or team coaching. And so I started to network with people. And there was a lot of trepidation. I was the primary income generator for the family. I have two children who were both pre-college. So this is not after college, but pre-college. We were in good shape financially, and that was a huge foundation that we needed in order for this transition to be successful. But, I will tell you, throughout the whole transition, as I was learning about coaching and learning about the industry and what I needed to do in order to move from being a corporate employee to a consultant, I always knew it would work. I always knew that if I could take the time and do it well, And time didn't always work in my favor because there were times where income was not coming in and it was becoming problematic. But if I could make it work, it would work. And, I'm just happy to say of the many things in life that I've been incorrect about, that was correct, that if I stuck with it and made it happen, it would work. So a lot of trepidation, but time and persistence and commitment can work in your favor.
Well, and I like what you said. I mean, look, you can take years of practical experience, mistakes that I'm sure you saw or even made, and say, look, I can help others kind of miss some of these challenges, these missteps. Maybe that's where that confidence came from, but clearly it's worked out. So how much time was that you went from that June day until you really started into the coaching world? What did that time frame look like for you?
Well, I would tell you, I think I am a classic example of converting from corporate employee to independent consultant in respect to making a transition from zero, level zero to having a business. And, I think of income in three different distinct buckets. I think of first generating any revenue. And so my first few years was, if somebody said, come wash my car on Saturday mornings, I would have said, absolutely, what time? I would do anything in order to generate revenue. And then you get to the flat revenue where your expenses equal your income, right? That you're not losing money, but you're not making money. And then the third level where I am today is where your revenue is greater than your expenses, and you can save some of it, right? Because you do want to still be a provider that can not only provide good income to your family, but also save some of it. I would tell you in hindsight, I got to that middle level of income equaling expenses after about 5 years. And so, it follows that classic restaurant model. You hear people talk about restaurants that if you can make the first 5 years with all the ups and downs and challenges and experiences that you have, your likelihood for success is significantly greater than, not making it through 5 years. And so, I've had, again, colleagues who have started right away and have had fantastic careers right out of the box, and others who could not make it and ended up going back to corporate America because either due to financial situations or relationship challenges at home, they decided they couldn't do this independent transition. But, for me, it was about, 5 years of effort to get to the point where I am today.
During that time, and again, I just like getting into the mind because so often I think being an entrepreneur, it has this sexy tone to it. But the truth is, 5 years of really being in that generating revenue and being excited to get any amount of income, that's kind of a scary place. Did you burn the bridges and just say, look, I'm going to make this work no matter what? Because you could have always gone back to corporate. I'm sure of that. But how did you keep that resilience, that persistence to know that this is my right path?
Well, I had a couple of advantages in my transition. One, I had been at Iron Mountain for 10 years. Even though they let me go, they did like me. So they felt, I think, a little bit bad in letting me go. So they gave me a fairly generous separation package. And so that carried me over. Plus, I had vacation week. And so that carried me over. So in reality, my first year, I was still earning what I had been making at Iron Mountain as part of my separation agreement. 2008, as some of us will recall, was a economic collapse. And so unemployment was extended significantly, just like it is during the pandemic. I did claim unemployment because I had been putting money into it for 30 years and decided that if I was going to make a transition, this is the time to use it. So I did collect unemployment, and it kept getting extended. So I had some advantages that worked in my favor. But I tell people who I talk to, JM, about making a transition that there's three things you have to have in order to make it work. And one of them is you have to have a strong financial foundation that, if you live paycheck to paycheck and have no savings and decide that you want to move from corporate to consulting, it's going to be almost impossible, because your first year to 2 years, you might not make any income. I still look back at my first year out of Iron Mountain at my revenue, and it's like a joke because it was like, $12,000 or something, it was like nothing. But you've got to have a strong foundation. The second thing, which I think is related, is you have to have significant spousal or significant other support, right? You can't every morning get up at the breakfast table and have someone look at you saying, is this going to work? Are you going to be able to do this? So fortunately, I am married to someone who is highly supportive of making this, transition work for me. So with good financial foundation and with good spousal support, I was able to make the turn. And, again, I'll reuse those words about commitment, persistence, and my true belief that it would work. I kept saying to my wife all the time, just with a little bit more time, I know this will work. Trust me, this will work. And, fortunately, she trusted me and it worked.
Well, I'll tell you that second layer, we probably don't talk about it enough. In fact, I know on my show, we certainly don't. That significant other support. And I don't care if it's corporate, being an entrepreneur. Look, having that support to say, you got it, babe, or, you're going to have an amazing day. That's so important because we're going to go through the roller coaster of a career. That's just the way it works. So I'm so glad you brought that up. So I'm guessing I haven't had a chance to read your first book, which is Raise Your Visibility and Value. Were you documenting this journey throughout? Is that where it came from? Or tell me more about that, because I love the title of the book.
Well, thank you. And, I think it's interesting that you describe it as, was I documenting it? Because it is a reflection on my 25 years in corporate. I didn't document it as I went, but once I became an independent consultant and quite frankly had a lot of time on my hands before I started getting, good client contacts, I thought I wanted to capture what my experiences were. And because it was 2008, I found that the word networking was being overutilized. I mean, there were networking webinars, networking training, networking events, networking this, networking that. It was everywhere. And I said, networking is great, right? And most people define networking as meeting, a friend at a Starbucks and talking about what they're doing, et cetera. But I thought that it was more important to look at networking as a subset of something bigger. And to me, the biggerness is being visible, which is being visible in your industry and being visible in your organization. And I found upon reflection that I wasn't as visible in Iron Mountain as I thought I was. And there were things that I could have done differently to be more visible. And of course, if you're going to be more visible, you have to ensure you're adding value. And this was also a transition going on in the marketplace, because a lot of recruiters would say, hey, I got your resume. It tells me what you did, but tell me why where you went was better because you were there. What value did you provide those companies in order to make them better? So don't just tell me what you were doing, but tell me the impact that you had. So, I brought those two together and said, look, there are things that you should be doing to be more visible. Networking is one of them. I'm a big fan of networking, but it's a subset activity. It is not your overall strategy. And then ensuring that whatever you do continues to provide value needs to be addressed as well. And again, this is both within your organization and industry, because the other thing that happens a lot, JM, is that once I get employed, I shut out my industry, right? I'm heads down at work. I'm focused on what I'm doing. I've got projects, initiatives. I don't have enough time. I'm highly stressed. I'm busy. And I don't have any time for anything in the industry until I get laid off. And now I need them. And it's too late, right? Because now you got to start from ground zero to build these relationships, et cetera. So, I just think it's important that you do a few things, not many, to stay active within your industry. And it's also things that you can bring back to your company. A lot of people think that if I stay connected to my industry, my boss is always going to think I'm looking for a job. But that's not the case. It's very important to stay connected to your industry. You can find best practices that you can bring back to your company. You can find business leaders who can influence your company. You can find new employees at these networking events who you can bring back to your company. So it's not always about me, but it's also about, how I can help the organization.
Yeah, I think the whole value idea, if you get the value, why would somebody be concerned about me leaving, right? If the company's providing value and I'm a happy employee, I'm not going anywhere. I may have decided to have a strategic partnership with someone, or now all of a sudden we are using the same vendor and getting a better price. I mean, that's but I understand what you're saying. Talk to me a little bit. So you did mention networking. What else? If I'm listening to this, I'm going, I want to be more visible. I do bring value. What are some other practical tips, without giving the book away, that people could do right now to really become more visible in their company today or in their industry?
Well, there are many things, right? And to your point, the book is filled with, I think, a ton of ideas on things that you can do to be more visible. Many of them are very basic, right? I love when I work with a client, and do consulting, whatever, because they're like, Ed, you're telling me everything that I know. Why did I hire you? And you hired me because I hold you accountable, right? It's not enough to know the idea. It's converting the idea to action, right? And so I'm here to help convert your ideas to action. But, a couple of things. And so within the book, Raise Your Visibility and Value, I identified 7 visibility accelerators. These are 7 things that you can do to be more visible within your organization. And quite honestly, the first one is introducing yourself effectively. We have as a culture lost the ability to take a moment to introduce ourselves to others. And, I noticed this personally because my older daughter was on the junior high school soccer team. And one of the parents would invite the team member parents over to their house to talk, to kick the year off, et cetera. And so my wife and I went. It was somebody's house. We'd never been there before. We knock on the door. They welcome us in. No one ever introduced themselves to us to say, hi, we're the parents of the kid whose house we're hosting the party at. Come on in, welcome. It was just odd that nobody even thought to introduce themselves to us. Other parents did. And of course, we knew some of the other parents, but the hosts never did. So I just observed this corporately. And I just found that this was so true that, when you go to a networking event and sit at a round table, I guarantee you 90% of the people will sit down, take out their iPhone, and ignore everybody else at the table. I never did that, at least not in my later years. And I would get up, I'd walk to the table, and before I sat down, I'd walk the table and I'd go to each person saying, hey, how are you? My name's Ed Evarts. I'm with X company. Who are you? Tell me, right? And at that point, when I sat down, I knew everybody at the table as opposed to blocking themselves off. So there's some very basic things that you could do in order to raise your visibility and value. The second thing I would tell you is ensure that on a regular basis, not frequently, but on a regular basis, you're finding time to meet one-on-one with your boss. I've worked with a number of clients, and this was true when I worked at Iron Mountain. People are very, I'll use the word busy. And because they're so busy, they're focused on projects and initiatives. They're not focused on themselves, and they're not focused on relationships. And the gap that can happen between you and your boss can grow and grow and grow. I've had clients who meet with their boss for a half hour once a month. I'm like, once a month you meet with your boss for a half hour? That's it? But that's all the time they can get because everybody's schedule is so crazy. So, for any of the listeners who think about the relationship they have with their boss, they should ensure that they, if anyone, schedules time with their boss, again, on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be frequently, to catch up on their career development and what's important to their boss to ensure that they're aligned with what's going on in their organization.
I'll tell you what, guys, I hope you heard that last one loud and clear. And this is literally taking your career into your own hands. So often, I think people are waiting for somebody to recognize that they're struggling, they're succeeding. Don't. This is your career. I hope, God, Ed, that was gold, because I tell this to my guys all the time. I'm like, look, don't wait for your supervisor, your boss, whoever it may be, to recognize that you're doing well or you're needing help. Speak up, because it's so important. So obviously the first book went well enough that you decided, I'm going to write a second one. And that one's called Drive Your Career. Tell me about that one, brother, because again, great titles. I don't know if that's all you, but I love it. So where did that one come from?
Well, I never planned on writing a second book, so I never had that particular moment. But, a couple of years passed after Raise Your Visibility and Value was published, and I just began to notice organic, after coaching at this point now for 10 to 11 years, that there were certain stories that just repeated themselves with clients, no matter who the client was. So regardless of their industry, regardless of their level, they could be a supervisor, they could be a president, organically, these situations would arise. And, I didn't mention these ideas purposely to them, but they just came up and they fit the situation. And so I had one of those shower moments where I said, you know what, I should document what these ideas are, because I think I've got, 8 to 10 of them. I'm not sure how many. And, gee, this could be the content of a new book. And so I started to observe the conversations I was having with clients, and there happened to be 9. And so Drive Your Career is really more of a reflection of my coaching career. And these are true, actual experiences and behaviors that I believe most leaders need to do most of. You can't do all 9 all the time, but even if you did 2 or 3, that would be fantastic. in order to be more of a driver of their career. So I loved your last commentary in respect to people that you talk to and your team, et cetera. There is no knight going to ride in and save you and notice, you know, if you work for a great boss who's highly empathetic, they might notice and say, hey, you seem to be in a little bit of a different mood today, what's going on, et cetera. But that doesn't happen often. You need to own your career. You need to be driving where you're going and what you're doing. You can't always be responsible for the opportunities provided to you, but you can be responsible for the choices you make and the direction you go in. So these 9 stories are designed to kind of motivate people to think a little bit more about that.
Can you give me one of the stories, just because again, I try to put myself in the audience shoes. I want to hear it. I want to hear the story. I want to increase my career. I'm all in, brother. So let's hear one of the stories.
Well, I'll share, you know, I think what's my personal favorite story, which is a chapter I call Play the Hand You've Been Dealt. And I'll take a longer story and shorten it significantly, but I've been playing in a biweekly poker game for 22 years. And, you know, in poker, you're dealt a hand, and, you know, you shuffle the deck and you're dealt 5 cards, and you can't choose what 5 cards you get 5 cards. And you then have one of 3 choices. You can either fold, you know, you just got dealt 5 poor cards and there's no opportunity there at all, so you're going to fold. You can bluff, which is to make people think you got something better than you do, but in reality, you don't. Or you can take action. You can trade in some cards and hopefully get a better hand. But those are really your only 3 options. And I noticed that that's a lot like people's experiences in the workplace, especially people starting at a new company. And this happened many times with many of my clients, that they would get a handout, right? That whatever the experience was they were having at their workplace, that's the experience. I can't change what I'm experiencing. So the relationships I have, the people who I'm working with, that's the hand I've been dealt. And a lot of my clients would talk and almost like provide an autopsy on what they've experienced. And I would say, you know, that's great to hear what you've experienced. I'm sorry, that's the hand you've been dealt. Let's talk about how you're going to play it. What are you going to do about the hand that you've been dealt? How are you going to play it? Are you going to fold and say, you know what, this isn't the right place for me. I didn't make a good choice. This is not going to help foster my career, so I'm out of here. Are you going to bluff and pretend? And this is where most of my clients are. They're bluffing that, you know, it is better than it really is. And, you know, bluffing is great short term. So if you wanted to bluff something between now and Friday, I'd probably say great. But, you know, beyond just a few days, it just doesn't make sense. So bluffing is not a great option. And then the last, of course, is what I work on with folks, which is to take action, to say, okay, if it's not what you thought it was, thanks for sharing that with me. Let's do a couple of things, 2 or 3 things in order to make it better. You know, what is it you want to do, or what is it that you can do? So that chapter is really focused on just recognizing that you have to acknowledge the hand you've been dealt. And if it's a poor hand, what are you going to do about it in order to improve it?
What a great analogy, man. I mean, honestly, a couple things came out of that. 22 years you've been playing in a bi-weekly. How much are you guys playing?
Bi-weekly, every other week, every other Wednesday.
Wow. That's really remarkable in itself. A. B, you're playing 5-card draw. Is that how I picked up on this?
No, we play any poker hand that the dealer wants to deal.
Ah, got it.
So we have a lot of crazy poker hands.
But the last point is, imagine for 22 years, taking this analogy, Ed trying to bluff his way for 22 years. It's a losing proposition, right? There's no possible way.
You can't do it physically. You can't do it mentally. Lots of people are doing it. You know, lots of people need to have conversations with people about what they're experiencing or how they're experiencing it. And they don't have the bravery. They don't have the motivation. They don't have the interest, the energy to do it. So they are shifting a little bit to fold, when in fact, they could potentially improve what their situation might be by doing something about it. But it's almost impossible to bluff as long as people are bluffing.
Yeah, it literally, I'm going to borrow the analogy because I love it. I literally love the way I play cards. So I'm playing it through my head. And when you put that, it's really good. So brother, then you started doing a podcast, or maybe you've been doing it, I don't know how long, but Be Brave at Work. Tell me more about it. I was a guest. I loved it. I think you do a great job hosting. What is it all about? What is being brave at work? What does that even mean?
So I started Be Brave at Work in December of 2019. So you are still in what I call the infancy of guests, JM, in respect to participating in the podcast. I am a student of podcasting. So just like I'm a student of coaching and leadership and human behavior, I still continue to be a podcast trainee on that front. And to be honest, I met with a colleague in the summer of 2019 who I had not seen for a number of years. And he mentioned he was starting a podcast distribution company. And I said something simple like, wow, I've always wanted to do a podcast. And he said, you're in, right? Let's do it. And he said, Ed, what would you want your podcast to be about? This was all in like a 5-minute conversation. And I said, the thing I think I would like the topic to be about is how to be braver at work. That if people were braver in what they wanted to say, to who they wanted to say it to, or things that they needed to do, work would be better, right? Because we add so many layers of drama and emotion to relationships, it complicates things. And I should have really good relationships with people at work. So if I wanted to say, hey, I have some feedback for you that I think you'd want to hear that could help you be a better leader, would you be interested in hearing it? I don't know. I think people would say, absolutely, let me hear it. Not everyone, but most people would. So I started the podcast, Be Brave at Work. It's a briefer experience. It's about 20 minutes in totality with people like yourselves who kind of live and breathe bravery in the workplace. And, the goal is really to help the listeners realize two things. One, they're not alone, that everybody has a moment where they need to be braver than they normally are. And two, ideas and suggestions on how to do it, right? So people like you come on and share your observations about bravery, as well as ideas and recommendations on things that you can do. My goal, of course, is to help people be braver at work.
Well, I mean, look, guys, we spend a third of our life at work. Why the heck not? Now, if you notice what he did, he gained permission before he ever gave any critique or not even criticism or any feedback. Did you hear how seamless you did that? You said, hey, I have some ideas. Are you open to hearing it? This is literally such a key point. So talk to me about gaining permission, because the way I heard that, I'm like, yeah, of course I'm in, rather than just going in and being like, this place sucks or this policy sucks, which is often where people get to because of resentment buildup and all that stuff. So talk to me about gaining permission before giving feedback or truly being brave at work.
Well, I love that you picked up on that. And I'm a huge fan of permission. Again, this is such a basic human behavior that we don't even recognize it or notice it. Yet, if I wanted to give you some feedback, and let's say that it's constructive feedback, you're more likely to listen. You're more likely to be engaged in what I'm saying if I first asked you if it's okay. But as you just described, oftentimes I walk in and say, I've had, the meeting we just had was terrible and I want to tell you why. And I'm not going to be open to it. I might be too busy. I don't have time to hear this right now, or defensive. Gee, I totally disagree. Right. So none of that helps. But anytime that you want to give people feedback, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that the time you're choosing is right, and say something very simple like, hey, I had some constructive feedback for you that I think would be helpful for you to hear. Is now a good time? Are you open to hearing it? You'll find that people will participate in that conversation. Now, you also have to be what I call socially aware, which is, as you're providing that feedback, being very observant of the other person. Because if you have touched a hot button inadvertently, or they're not good at getting feedback, and their neck starts to go red, or they're starting to break pencils on the desk, you want to pause and say, hey, it seems like the feedback that I'm providing you is not having the reaction that I thought. Is now still a good time? Do you still want to go through it? Do you want to take a break? But don't keep plowing ahead, because if that person isn't receiving it well, their interest level in hearing it is now diminishing. So even though you asked for permission, permission is not some magic wand that you can now say anything to the person at all. You have to also watch to see how what you're saying is being received. And if it's not being received well, you should pause. You always should pause a conversation if it's not going well, to ensure that you can continue or start or even stop and say, look, maybe now isn't a good time. Let's talk about it in a couple of weeks. That might give you some time to think about it.
Well, guys, and anybody, guys and gals, excuse me, I say guys, but everybody, if you think about this and think about it with your significant other, this is exactly what you're talking about. Look, this is going down a really poor path. Let's go ahead and time out. We'll come back to it when the emotions are no longer involved. And it's such great advice. In fact, Lisa and I use a specific word. It's called blueberry. We know right then it means everyone shut their mouth. We will revisit because what I'm going to say next is going to go really bad. I know that you work with in the intro, like we talked about, with leaders on their self-awareness. What are some tips to recognizing that, having better self-awareness? I think of emotional intelligence, those books, as being part of that. But tell me, that's part of what you help coach on. How can people be more self-aware?
Well, the interesting first piece about self-awareness is your recognition that you are not as self-aware or need more self-awareness experiences. So oftentimes I work with people who are completely open to doing an autopsy of how on others experience them in the workplace. They're totally open to hearing it. They don't get defensive. They want to hear it because they know the more they know about how others experience them, the more they can do something about it. I tell clients all the time, the one person at your company who should know how everyone thinks about you is you, right? And unless you know, how can you ensure that you're managing well? How can you ensure that they're not all smiling at you and then going to the water cooler and saying, oh my God, I can't help, I hate that guy and he drives me crazy. So you need to ensure that you're creating that type of relationship. So the first piece is really developing an understanding of how self-aware, interested the client might be. I also have worked with people who aren't interested in hearing this information, that either where they are in their career or to the degree that, psychologically their arrogance or ego has overtaken everything. And they're like, there's really nothing anyone could tell me, Ed, that would help. I'm not interested. That's important to know as well, because quite frankly, as a coach, working with a person like that is a waste of time. And that's not somebody that you want to help. So, the first key, I think, JM, is really recognizing, helping people be more self-aware. So I sort of forgot your question, but, the second, so stop me if I'm not answering it. The second thing I would say that people should focus on is data collection, right? So, all right, so I am open and I want to be self-aware about how people are experiencing me, good or bad. I now need to collect some data to ensure that I know it. And there's really one or two ways that we can do that. One is some type of 360 where we go online and people fill out a document that provides you information. It's confidential, it's anonymous. 99% of the time I've read a 360, it feels like everybody was honest and they said what they wanted to say. Or you can interview people. So you don't do it online, but you schedule time and do it live. And those are based on client needs. Some people like the online system because it's more flexible. I can do it a Sunday night. Others like the in-person model because they want you to build relationships with those people a little bit deeper than an online model might be. But I think building your ability to be self-aware and then collect data so that you do know where you are in respect to people's expectations are two key areas to work on.
Oh, you absolutely answered the question. I mean, look, data collection and feedback. We talked about it. Feedback. How can you get better if you don't know? I've got to ask you though. You use the word autopsy, and I've never heard somebody use that specific to what we're talking about. You use your verbiage is different, brother, which I really appreciate. Tell me how you came up with the autopsy, because it's just an interesting way to put that.
Well, again, it's not purposeful, but when I think about CSI, one of the things that's happened in TV over the last 30 years is they show a lot more than you need to see, right? It's kind of like these moments where they're showing an autopsy, but an autopsy is where we look on the inside, right? And we see what's happening and why it's happened. And I just think it's very similar to building self-awareness. It's about looking on the inside as to how you behave, how you interact with others, how people experience you, because if you do not know this, your likelihood for managing yourself effectively is marginalized. And I'm not suggesting self-awareness creates perfection. Even the Bill Gates of the world will tell you that he's not perfect at everything. And the things he's not perfect at, he hires people to do because he just will never be perfect at it. So, and there's things I'm not perfect at, and I'm sure there's things you would say you're not perfect at, right? But so what do we do, right? But if my self-awareness is low and I think I'm great at it and nobody else does, and I'm at a senior level position where no one is going to tell me I'm not great at it, they're all bluffing and pretending like it's great. I think I'm great at it, and nothing good comes from that relationship. So
No, I like it. I mean that as a compliment. I've just never
yeah.
heard it put that way. So I got to ask you again, dealing as an entrepreneur, one of the things that failure is inevitable. I mean, look, we're going to come up with an idea and absolutely fail. I think that's one thing I will give entrepreneurs. We are great at failing. My question is, do you have a specific process or thought process when it comes to failure, and how does that look for you?
Well, I've accepted, an entrepreneurial model that, failure equals progress. That, unless I try things and make them work, I'll never know if they would have worked or not. And so, fortunately, certain things like the books I've written or the podcast seem to work. I certainly have had client engagements that I thought would I maintain year after year and ended after one event. And I'm not suggesting it is because I didn't like them or they didn't like me, but it just never materialized, right? But I do subscribe to that philosophy that culturally, and this is very important for organizations, you have to create a culture where failure is accepted. We learn from it and we move on. Unfortunately, and this was a little bit true at Iron Mountain, and part of it was myself creating this premise that failure was unacceptable, that everything had to be done perfectly right. God forbid that anything should be done incorrectly, because failure was a problem. And, it just really stifles creativity. It stifles engagement. It stifles progress. You have to ensure that people know that, hey, it didn't work the way that we thought. We're going to revisit how we did it, and next time it's going to work better. There's nothing wrong with that mentality, as long as it's something that you're doing that you're able to do again in a more productive way.
Yeah, it's really important to recognize what you just said, because as a culture to say, look, I want you to fail, that gives people the freedom, the autonomy to give their best effort. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. You're doing your best. Let me ask you, I'm looking at you behind you. You have books galore. You've written a couple books. I love asking this question because I love to read and write myself, but what are 2 or 3 of the most impactful books you've ever read that have really shaped your career path? We talked a lot about career, your professional development.
So a couple of books I would mention. One is The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. And so Amy is a Harvard professor and a leader in psychological safety. I'm a huge fan, JM, of cultural direction. And so I just don't believe these things can exist in a company unless culturally we accept them and recognize them and reward them. And so psychological safety is a experience where you need to ensure that people can be who they are when they need to be who they are, and that we're not adding drama and emotion and relationships into it and complicating things. So I'm sure you've been in team meetings where psychological safety was not existent and the boss did the talking and everybody else said, yes, sounds good. And then of course, after the meeting was the meeting after the meeting that everybody said the exact opposite. So, that is a great book. The Leadership Challenge is also another great book. And in that, it has a simple 5-part model. And the Leadership Challenge is really great for individuals who are trying to identify their leadership style. And that's another huge area of interest to me. And quite frankly, if I was to do another podcast, which I'm not, but if I was, it would be on helping people identify their leadership style. Who am I? What is the reputation I want to have, and how can I make that reputation exist, right? So, I think the Leadership Challenge is also another great book that helps people identify how they want to operate, professionally.
I like that because, I mean, look, there's many leadership styles. There's not one that is perfect. It just doesn't.
Right.
Brother, I think we answered so many questions, but I know there's something I probably missed. What should I have asked you that I just didn't know enough to ask? I know we've spent a couple hours now together, but what have I missed that you're like, dang it, Jam, I got to get this out to the audience?
You ignored the fact that I live in New England, and you didn't ask if I was a Tom Brady fan. So,
Still bitter about the Bucks beating my Packers in the NFC Championship. So that's why. But go ahead. Are you a Brady fan?
I am. I am. But look, I think you asked a lot of great questions. I would encourage, if people are interested, to pick up a copy of Raise Your Visibility and Value or Drive Your Career, or go to bebraveatwork.com. Your podcast will be posted there as soon as we get to it on the calendar. All the ones that we've done to date are there. So if folks want to listen, they're only like 20 minutes long, so they're not extensive time commitments. And I hope people can learn a little bit about being braver in the workplace in order to really figure out what some good next steps might be in order to make progress. And by the way, it's funny, whenever I talk to people about being braver at work or driving their career, almost always people are shaking their heads in agreement that they need to do things differently than they're doing it today in order to make progress. Not many of us have such a perfect experience that they don't need to change or do anything a little bit differently.
100%. Brother, you guys check it out. Look, Ed's a smart guy. He's been doing this a long time, very successfully. Let me ask you, is there a place that our listeners should connect with you online?
Sure. They can go to my website, which is excelluis.com, EXCELLIUS.com. And more information than you'd ever need to know is located on that website.
All right. And I should have asked you this. Now I'm just curious because I didn't know how to properly pronounce it without asking you. What is Excelluis? Where did you come up with this name? I should have asked you this earlier.
Maybe that was the question I should have had you ask me, but I made it up.
Be damned. I like the play on words, brother. I really do. Well, Ed, I appreciate how you show up in the world. I think what you're talking about is so important because, again, a third of our life spent at work. Be braver at work. Thank you so much for what you're doing, man, and being here today. I really appreciate it.
JM, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's been great chatting with you.
Truly our pleasure. I'll tell you what, you guys, I had a great time listening to being a part of his podcast, now having him on as a guest. Go check him out. Check out the books. Also, I want you to go to Amazon. It's Champions Daily Playbook. Guys, it's $10. It absolutely will change your life in a positive manner if you just for 90 days. I want you to go check it out and try it. $10. If you're not happy, let me know. I'll pay you back the $10. Until next time, continue transcending life. We'll talk to you then. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.